Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 94. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. Cytokinetics is a late-stage specialty cardiovascular biopharmaceutical company focused on discovering, developing, and commercializing first-in-class muscle activators and next-in-class muscle inhibitors as potential treatments for debilitating diseases in which cardiac muscle performance is compromised. This week we have a conversation with the CEO of Cytokinetics, Robert Blum, about the company's aficamten, following a phase 3 clinical trial in obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I wanted to get things started if you could tell me a little bit about the origin of the company.
Cytokinetics is a company that I started in 1998, so over 25 years ago, with an ambition to mine a new area of biology that our founding scientists pioneered in their academic laboratories. And our objective has been to industrialize that for potential new medicines. That area of biology is called the cytoskeleton, and it has implication to the mechanical activities of cell behavior. And Cytokinetics has been engaged for these many years in discovery and development of potential new medicines that are modulators of proteins specifically focused to the mechanics of muscle contractility, as could give rise to new medicines that address diseases of muscle weakness and muscle dysfunction. In particular, amongst those are potential medicines that we're advancing now in late stage development that address cardiovascular conditions associated with either hyper or hypocontractility of cardiac muscle for diseases of severe cardiovascular weakness.
In that particular field, what are the current treatments?
So interestingly, despite there being many new advances in cardiovascular medicine over recent decades, there are very few of those innovations that tie to cardiac muscle directly. Most of the drugs that we use to treat cardiovascular conditions are ones that act secondarily on the heart and more address consequences and symptoms associated with cardiovascular disease etiology. So Cytokinetics medicines, as we are developing them, are designed specifically to modulate the proteins involved in the biomachinery of cardiac muscle, and that would represent a major new advancement for innovation in cardiac disease. We've made good progress in cardiovascular diseases by addressing hypertension, high blood pressure, by addressing the formation of blood clots that can be complicating to cardiovascular patients, by addressing things like cholesterol that can give rise to risk factors associated with cardiac illness. But unfortunately, those have come without accompanying innovations in medicines associated with cardiac muscle itself. And that's where hopefully Cytokinetics can make a meaningful impact.
Do you have any information or stats on the prevalence of heart disease and what your work will hopefully mean for people with some of these conditions?
Certainly. So cardiovascular disease still represents, despite those innovations, the number one killer, the number one disease for highly prevalent populations that is associated with mortality. It's also the number one reason why people are hospitalized, especially those over the age of 65 in the United States and also outside the United States. Heart failure is the number one reason why patients are hospitalized, and those patients are often hospitalized, discharged, readmitted again, and again. And that makes heart failure the leading cause of not only hospitalization, but as is also associated with the leading economic burden societally for those patients. So it represents a major opportunity where new cardiovascular medicines could be welcomed, not just simply for the benefit of clinical evidence to support better quality of life and functional life, but also as could be for the costs associated with healthcare, a major opportunity for economic savings.
I wonder if we could kind of turn to your current pipeline now, starting with aficamten. What is it and how does it work?
Aficamten is a small molecule synthetic organic compound discovered by our scientists that binds directly to cardiac myosin. That's the enzyme or engine of cardiac muscle contractility. And it has been associated with the inhibition of cardiac myosin, preventing it from driving cardiac contractility, and as is especially important for those patients who have hypercontractile cardiac muscle, meaning that their cardiac muscle is excessively contracted. And by inhibiting cardiac myosin, the therapeutic hypothesis is to suppress the hypercontractility, relax the cardiac muscle, and in that way address the symptoms and the potential downstream clinical burden of that disease. These patients have what is called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So aficamten is being studied for the treatment of both obstructive and non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And it's been the subject of a positive phase 3 clinical trial called SEQUOIA-HCM that we top-lined by press release in December 2023. And we're very excited. Next week, Monday, May 13, we're going to be presenting the data from that study at the European Heart Failure meetings in Lisbon. That'll be the first opportunity for the scientific and medical community to see the data from Sequoia, and Sequoia will be the subject of 3 late-breaking clinical trial presentations on that day. We also expect many more presentations and publications from the ongoing clinical trials of aficamten this year, with focus both to obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and further advancement and expansion of our development program this year. In fact, this morning, we announced the start of another clinical trial of aficamten in patients who are pediatric with obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And we also have 2 other ongoing phase 3 studies, another one in obstructive HCM and one in non-obstructive HCM. So this is, for us, a broad development program for what we believe aficamten can be next in class and potential best in class treatment, physician choice for patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
How is it administered and how often does it need to be administered?
So that's one of the wonderful things. As it is a synthetic organic compound, it can be administered orally once a day.
That's excellent. Where are you at currently with the pathway towards this becoming commercially available?
So we are engaging now with regulatory authorities with emphasis to the FDA in the United States and EMA in Europe. Our plan is to be submitting an NDA with the FDA in the United States in Q3 of this year and an MAA to EMA in Europe in Q4 this year. So the goal is to have these regulatory submissions in place this year, in the second half of this year, 2024, as could be enabling of potential approvals and making these medicines available to patients next year, 2025.
What will that mean for patients? Is this something that they would have to take for the rest of their life, or is there any benefit for early intervention with your treatment?
Very good question. So the patients who currently have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy have few treatment options, and they live with a heavy symptom burden as well as a lot of anxiety associated with their disease. The symptom burden manifests itself primarily in terms of breathlessness and inability to exercise and a compromised quality of life and functional life. So we hope, if approved, aficamten could be available to these patients to address those matters. And in particular, in the clinical trial, SEQUOIA-HCM, aficamten was associated with a clinically meaningful improvement in exercise capacity and stamina, as well as improvements in measures of quality and functional life. So a medicine like this could become a good alternative to the existing treatments that include surgery, as well as other approved medicines that really haven't been demonstrated to have evidence of support in this indication. It would be expected that these patients would start on aficamten and continue on aficamten indefinitely. And one of the things we're studying in longer-term extension studies of aficamten is the potential of remodeling in this disease, remodeling of the anatomy as demonstrated echocardiographically, and that could speak, if demonstrated in these longer-term studies, to a reversal of the pathophysiology that contributes to this disease. And that could be very, very exciting as well.
The presentations that you're giving in Portugal next week, are you able to tell us anything about those?
Just that they will elaborate on the data as already press released, and we believe that they will be reinforcing and reassuring of what we believe to be a next-in-class profile for cardiac myosin inhibition in this disease. And we are hopeful that they will be embraced and welcomed by the medical community as could become a new standard of care in this disease.
Are there any other areas where aficamten could potentially make a positive impact?
Yeah, so I mentioned we're studying it not just in obstructive HCM, but now also non-obstructive HCM. And we expect to have two other studies reading out, one in 2025, one in 2026, in obstructive and non-obstructive HCM, respectively. And those could be enabling of aficamten to reach a broader array of patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Just this morning, we announced also that a compound that is similar to aficamten, but with a distinct mechanism of action, a compound called CK-586, is advancing from phase 1 to phase 2. CK-586, like aficamten, is a cardiac myosin inhibitor, but it binds to a different site in myosin, has different properties, and may lend itself differently pharmacologically. It's being studied in an adjacent indication to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and that indication is called heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And heart failure represents, as I mentioned earlier, a much larger prevalent population in the United States, over 5 million patients with heart failure, in comparison to a few 100,000 with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And we're looking at heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which represents about half of that prevalent population of heart failure. And a subset of those patients have hypercontractility that resembles in profile similar to non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So we're going to be advancing into phase 2 later this year, CK-586 as a potential treatment for those patients with heart failure and preserved ejection fraction who, similar to patients with non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy have high ejection fractions, hypercontractility, and where they too could benefit from symptom relief and addressing of their underlying cardiac myosin disorder. So we do believe that with this announcement this morning, we're further expanding our pipeline and reach of this biology, this innovative new pharmacology, to a new patient population. And that speaks to our corporate strategy as is rooted in this biology and expanding to more of these diseases of severe cardiovascular dysfunction, but for where we believe from a business standpoint, there are good synergies, economic efficiencies, and that should be enabling of us to build a more valuable, sustainable cardiovascular specialty franchise business.
You'd mentioned CK-586. I wonder if you could tell me something about CK-136?
CK-136 is an activator of cardiac troponin. Troponin is a regulator of cardiac myosin, and CK-136 looks to have promise as could be enabling of augmenting cardiac function in patients where that's compromised. That's in phase 1 evaluation now for potential progression to phase 2. We haven't yet analyzed those data to make any determination about the advancement of CK-136.
If you could tell me something about omecamtiv mecarbil?
Yes, omecamtiv mecarbil is a cardiac myosin activator. Think of it as the flip side of the cardiac myosin inhibitor. And we studied it in over 30 clinical trials to assess its potential to treat heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, where the biomachinery of cardiac muscle is compromised, and the therapeutic hypothesis is to activate cardiac myosin to increase cardiac performance for those patients. And it was the subject of a positive phase 3 study called Galactic, and that study was the subject of a regulatory application for potential approval, but for which the FDA indicated that while positive, they would like to see a confirmatory study. So we are still in the process of assessing what would be potential next steps with omecamtiv mecarbil. We've not made any commitments to this point.
Still plenty to do then, other than aficamten. There's still lots on your plate.
Yeah, we believe that we have architected and are executing on a plan for an uncommon specialty cardiovascular company. I say that because there are companies in the biopharmaceutical space that have been focused to cardiology, but not a specialty model. And by a specialty model, I mean for which we believe we've got several advancing programs in development that would be all directed to the same concentrated customer segment, enabling of us a rapidity of potential product approvals and potential medicines directed to the same opportunities in a way that would enable a high return on R&D investment, a high return on sales and marketing investment, and therefore a high return on shareholder equity. And we believe this is the path to building a sustainable, enduring company as could be rewarding to shareholders and at the same time deliver on the promise of our science for potential benefit to more and more cardiovascular patients. As we're embarking on this strategy, we believe that we're in an advantage position to go to market ourselves in North America and also Europe, but to do so in a gated, prudent way. Ours is a company that has been a good student of those companies that have preceded us and those that have built specialty care franchise models. We think we can do that in the cardiovascular space, but we also recognize limitations, and we will seek partners in certain geographies We're diversifying our access to capital to ensure that we deploy capital in the most efficient way. And I think our R&D strategies, our corporate and business development strategies have enabled us to build a very valuable company, valuable to patients as well as shareholders. And we look forward to further advancements along those dimensions.
Lots of great progress there from Cytokinetics in treating heart disease. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.